I think this is one of the most important webinars we've actually done, because anxiety hits all of us, no matter how hardcore we think we are, or Wonder Woman. I know I get it really badly. But there's also really good tips and kind of easy things you can do to kind of spiral out. And to me, there's no one better, and I love her anyway, than Emma Kenny, who I cheer on ITV this morning every time she's on there, shouting at people. But yeah, she is unbelievable. A lot of you know of her, who she is, has seen her, will recognize the voice. And she's got a new app as well out, Appy. So it's all about mental health and wellness and looking after yourselves. So I'm going to hand over to the expert. And what we're going to do is, if you've got any questions, then fire them over. And we might interject a bit with a question that's relevant, and then some questions at the end. So over to you, Ems.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all. As Emma said, I kind of like all sessions, whenever I do a session, to be as interactive as possible. And everybody experiences anxiety subjectively. So you might have a question that you want to ask, and obviously you can do it anonymously here. So I would just say, send in whatever your thoughts are. Don't feel embarrassed. If there's a particular issue that's doing your head in at the moment, connect with me over it, because it'll be something that I've dealt with or treated, and definitely something I've got some advice over. The next 30 minutes, I'm going to kind of go through what anxiety is, and also some coping strategies. Also try to look at kind of the way that we've got to separate what is ours and what is the world around us. At the moment, we've been under a really unbelievable amount of stress. So if I take you back to 7 months ago, do you remember when the government said we were going to get locked down for 3 weeks and it was all going to be fine? And then 7 months later, as we watch the economy in the situation that it's in, and we've been juggling children at home and trying to manage our personal relationships, and potentially looking at unemployment or entrepreneurship, where we're struggling to get our companies coping with this new climate. These are all things that, whilst they feel very personal, are actually things that have been given to us by external forces. And it's really important, because when we feel an emotion, we internalize it. So it feels very much ours. So instead of being able to say, well, you know what, all that stuff that I'm feeling, that doesn't belong to me, we tend to swallow it. And women more than men, even though men absolutely struggle with anxiety, women more than men tend to catastrophize, which is something we'll come on to later on. But as I said, if you're a guy watching today, suicide levels are always higher in males, because you are terrible at talking about your issues. So please don't feel that I'm trying to alienate you with that comment. So first of all, just to give you the heads up on what's been happening to your brain. And again, I think when we look at anxiety, depression, emotion, we often separate what is physical from what is emotional, and it doesn't make sense. I think it's really unhelpful. And I think it's one of the reasons why we don't talk about the fact that we're struggling. So the brain, it isn't like your kidneys or your knee. It can't interject the way it feels with a pain. It can only tell you there's something dysfunctional about it using an emotional response. So when we feel something emotionally, it's our brain trying to kind of give us an emotional prompt to let us see that there's something not quite going on that should be going on. So when I say that, particularly at the moment, I'm referring to an area of the brain, and I promise you it won't be this complex throughout. And a lot of you probably know about this anyway, because you've probably been feeling really lethargic, exhausted, angry, and overwhelmed. And that's probably made you look at why you might feel that way, and you'll come up with these answers. So I have an area of our brain that's really powerful. It's what I'm using now. It's what Emma was using when she was talking about introducing me. It's called the prefrontal cortex. It's an area of the brain that's really important for higher functioning. It's what you need for the jobs that you do, for managing patients with children, and definitely for going through the day-to-day job roles that we all have. That area of the brain is powerful. It's essentially the consciousness area, and we need it for everything, but it is literally dreadful when it's under stress. So if you think about human beings, we got to this point, and then evolutionarily, because of dogs and fire, which is kind of the two main things that changed and shifted, we went from being foragers to head of the food chain, which is great. It means that we kind of survive a lot better now, but it also means that we didn't necessarily go through what other animals would go through to get to the position that we are in, which means that we've still got some rudimentary coping strategies that are from instinct-orientated activity, and that's called the amygdala. Some people will talk about it being the amphibian brain. Some people will talk about it being the instinctual brain. But basically, it's the thing that when you need to run out of a car and get out of the way of another car that's heading for you, you don't think about it. Your prefrontal cortex doesn't go, oh, that's a red car speeding towards me at 65 miles per hour. Maybe I should shift to the left. It doesn't happen like that. The amygdala squashes the prefrontal cortex and it gets on with the instinct. And you get all that feeling of adrenaline and cortisol just coursing through your veins. And you feel really panicky. But the main bit is you got out of the way of the car. So the instinct area of the brain should be with you for a second. And you've had 7 months of it. So you've had 7 months of the instinct area of the brain, the amygdala, feeling this level of stress and cortisol and adrenaline going through your system, the prefrontal cortex going, oh, hang on, we've got to let this area of the brain take over to make us survive. And the problem with that is it's left you feeling exhausted. It's left you feeling like your patience is frayed. You might feel overwhelmed. You might feel tearful. You might feel like you just don't want to be with your partner anymore. You might feel when you pack your job in. All of these things are very present when that area of the brain is impacted. So I'm talking about that because it's really essential that a lot of us who are feeling like we're failing because we're not feeling able to cope during this experience, it's not because you're failing. It's because you are a completely typical, normal, healthy human. And I don't think we're talking about that enough. On top of that, we're going to additionalize the fact that you've had 7 months of propaganda and fear. I'm not saying for 1 minute that people do not die of COVID. Of course they do. And it's really important that we protect people. And it's very important that we look after the people that we love. But we have not required the 24/7 constant pumping narrative of fear because it traumatizes you. On a conscious level, it's because you see the experience of vicarious trauma. You read about stories. You believe that people are being affected that could be local to you and so on and so forth. You worry about your protective mechanism, your children, your friends, your family, your parents. And so these are all very powerful triggers to cope with constantly. So it's again, bringing that back down to the what is mine and what is theirs? What is it that I really own anxiety-wise? And what actually is it that's been given to me elsewhere? So before we start the session, I want to say that because more and more I'm speaking to women and men who think that they're failing because they don't know how to deal with this situation. And just to add a further caveat to anxiety, which is one that we don't talk about a great deal, desensitization. You might be more of an anxiety reactor like me. If I don't get proof of something very quickly, I become desensitized to an environment. Now, on one level, that can be really helpful because that means that my anxiety has said, I've not got the proof, I'm just going to switch off from it. But on the other hand, that might mean that actually I'm not really taking care of myself how I should do. Because if I'm desensitized to the anxiety around me, am I really thinking about my own safeguarding and protection? And has anxiety turned me off and desensitized me against all of these instructions because now I feel so overwhelmed with having to confront what's really going on? And I think it's important that we explore those dynamics because very often you'll have the super scared and the super not bothered at all. And somewhere in between is kind of the area that we're kind of wanting to aim for. So first of all, what is anxiety? Well, anxiety is a physical sensation. It's known as the adrenaline response. And basically the adrenaline response is when we think that there is a real or, actual perceived threat or danger. And it's our body's automatic survival mechanism. And it kicks in really quickly. Like I was saying before, it is the thing that you get that whoosh of panic. And it's basically an automatic survival mechanism. And it helps us get away. It helps us hide, or it helps us get into a fight. That's known as the fight, flight, or freeze response. And the action that we've got is basically, it's helping us survive all these generations. It means that we can avoid something or get away from something. There's a question that's come through. I'll read it. I've always suffered with anxiety, but due so many extra personal and family things that have happened and continuing to happening during all this time regarding COVID, I've been isolated. I've left the house a couple of times since March, but now I'm at a point where I don't leave the house. I get a severe panic attack. I feel lost. I don't feel like me. I don't even know what to do. The person I spent all my time with, I haven't seen since March. I don't know how to cope. I will go through that a bit later on, but what you're feeling is not because you aren't coping. It's because you have been put into a position of behavior mechanism where you believe you have been protecting yourself. Your fight, flight response we've just talked about has become the freeze response, i.e. you want to hide away. But actually, you've got this brilliant part of your brain and it's saying, this isn't working. So the bit that you're not listening to, which is the bit that says, go and see your partner, that's the bit of survival that you need to start volumizing and amplifying. I'll come to that later on. So the bit that's telling you this feels awful, what am I doing? I don't like being scared of my own experience. I want to go and see my partner. That's the bit of your brain that is the you within this. The rest of it is the collateral COVID damage. So obviously, when you are anxious, we'll just go through kind of the typical behaviors. These are not exhaustive. I won't remember all of them, but the ones that kind of stick with me as being problematic experience where anxiety is concerned. By the way, I will try to get through all this. Emma will know. I tend to go on quite a lot, so apologies if I don't cover everything. So we would tend... We would tend to see that people will avoid places, or people, as was just represented in that question, people won't go out, you won't go to certain places that you'd have used to have gone, so shops, particularly at the moment. You might feel that you can only go out if you're with somebody else. If you go to a social experience, limited as they might be at the moment, you want to leave earlier, escape. You might have safety behaviors, and I talk about those being coping situations which will get you through a situation, such as having to have alcohol or a cigarette, or carrying something that you can fiddle with your hands, making sure that you've told somebody an excuse so you can leave early, having some pain medication with you because it kind of helps reduce the anxiety during an experience. They're all kind of coping strategies that can mean that they're negative because they don't actually help you confront, but they give you an escape route. And essentially, when you avoid people, to some degree, that makes you feel better at the time, but it doesn't actually help you reduce your anxiety because you're not dealing with the core issue. And it's the same when you go to the shops. If you just internet shop all the time because you're afraid of going to the shops, the lack of exposure confirms the bias, I must be scared. And therefore, whilst it feels on one level easier because they just deliver my shopping to my house, on a mental health level, it's really negative because you're not exposing yourself to what is human and what is important. What's really important is everybody feels anxious. It's completely normal. If you weren't anxious before a pitch, for a new opportunity for funding or an interview or some of the exams you'll have taken in the past, you won't have felt motivated. Anxiety helps us to focus. It's one of those things that can make us more alert. So if we get the right level, it's really consciously helpful, but too much is really unhealthy and really detrimental to our lives and our relationships. And that's what I was talking about earlier on. What you're feeling right now is so much more than just the you. So it's really powerful that you start to connect with that and unpick, well, okay, where am I within this anxiety response? And where are all the baggage pieces that have been passed to me through this particular pandemic? And if you've had anxiety prior to this, you can additionalize all the things that you've already been feeling and connect with this even more so. When we come to looking at how we manage anxiety, we have to do things differently. That quote that says, if everything you've ever done, it's all you ever do is everything you've ever done, then all you'll ever get is what you're going to get. We know what you've always got. It's that situation. And I have a belief that everything will be all right in the end. And if it isn't all right, then it isn't the end. So that's my counter to that belief, that you can always change and shift things. So if you avoid situations and you use those kind of safety mechanisms to maintain your anxiety, then you have to confront them. So for anybody now who's feeling uncomfortable or feeling a lack of courage or believing that they've got into behavior patterns that are negative for them, it's really hard to say this because it's the last thing you want to hear, but you have to absolutely start to confront them. And the way that you do that is gradual and planned. So if you normally avoid going out to a big social event, for example, then the graded exposure would be to go and have a small dinner with a few friends at a restaurant, just somewhere you feel comfortable. Some people that you might be colleagues with or friends with, or people that you just feel that you can be yourself with, a small amount. You wouldn't go straight to the annual Christmas party, for example, not that that will be on this year, but you know that whilst it will feel uncomfortable, you'll learn that during that experience, you can enjoy it. So the anxious feeling does go away because it finds its place. And then you create this hierarchy of fears. For anybody who wants to learn about that, hierarchy of fears, you'll be able to Google, and it basically helps you to explore what is uncomfortable to what is like super, super scary. And that will enable you, to start to explore what places, what positions, what areas that cause the biggest amount of fear. And let's take a phobia, for example. If you've got a lift phobia, you might want to start by standing next to a lift for a couple of minutes. And I know this sounds really infant-like, but it's so powerful. The more we connect with it, I've even had people with phobias literally watch films where there are things to do with particular phobic reactions. The more we expose, the more we gradually increase our confidence. And that's really important. Add to that things like diaphragmatic breathing. I bang on constantly. In fact, it's a constant thread when trolls come on against me on social media and they're like, Emma Kenny, all she says is do some deep breathing. But the reason that I do that is deep breathing has been clinically proven to actually have a massive impact on things like panic disorder and anxiety disorder. The reason that I break those into two is it feels the same. For the person who just said about feeling panicky, you will feel panic and anxiety in the same context. If you have an anxiety attack or a panic attack, it feels the same. It's slightly different though. An anxiety attack is when we expect to have been exposed to a trigger. I'll take the lift example. I see a lift, I'm phobic of a lift, I have an anxiety attack. I can see the connection. So to some degree, dealing with an anxiety attack and an anxiety trigger is slightly easier than a panic trigger, because a panic trigger may be more unconscious. You might be walking across a bridge and you suddenly can't breathe. You hyperventilate, but you didn't realize that the reason that you did that was because somewhere in your unconscious, that experience of walking across the bridge has triggered something from your childhood that might have been challenging. So panic can be more challenging, but the feeling is exactly the same. And to approach it in the same way, we use diaphragmatic breathing. I would use the box breath every single day of the week, and I do that every single day of the week. That means breathing in through the nose for 4, holding for 4, breathing out for 4, and holding for 4, repeating for about 10 minutes, 3 times a day. Tends to help you get your CO2 and O2 in the right position. And the other thing it will prevent is when you feel super anxious, you often feel like you've left your body. You really do. You can feel like you're having an out-of-body experience. And again, that can feel like your body's reacting against you, but it's not. It's a protective experience. When we are hyper anxious, our job body-wise is to survive. So it sends all of the adrenaline and cortisol from our brain in our blood to our extremities. And it does that for one reason. Back in the days where we had to fight, I might have lost a limb. If I lose a limb, I need you to clot my blood so I don't bleed out. That's why if somebody gets knocked down by a train and a limb's removed, they tend to live more than if you're stabbed in the stomach and left to bleed out. It comes down to our natural connection with survival. So that depersonalization, that literally feeling like you've left your body, can be brought back with diaphragmatic breathing. It's really important. When we're dealing with anxiety, you have to ask yourself, what am I reacting to? What is it that I think is going to happen next? Is this fact or is it an opinion? So is my thinking that I've lost my job and no one's ever going to employ me again, is that a fact or is it actually an opinion? Because the truth is that most opinions are not facts, and most catastrophizing is based on fear and not reality. Because if we look at our reality, if we've had a job, even if we've lost the job, we've had a job. Therefore, we already deny the catastrophic thought process because we have a reality that says that hasn't happened before. Exploring what the worst is, that's really powerful. We often run from our fears because we're afraid that if we start to confront them, somehow we're going to manifest that. It's amazing how many people in their brain think that if we think something, it will be. It's almost like the counter to think of a vision of positivity and in 5 years, you'll be a millionaire. Okay, you might be, but not just by thinking of it. You know, if you're going to do the 5 years millionaire, you better get working. Likewise, if you think about the worst case scenario, the steps that need to occur for you to arrive at that worst case scenario, you would need to put some work in, or you'd need to just stop and do nothing to achieve that, as in not move from your seat to arrive at the catastrophic position that you've got a thought process around. So figuring out what the worst could happen is actually helpful, because when you do that, you create these strategies and it helps you to figure out, am I getting things completely out of proportion? Which I would say 99% of the time, we all are. And also, it's really important to think about the fear now and how bad that fear will be, or if it remains in 6 months. So often the fear that we have is temporary and can be managed quite quickly. And actually, if we look at it like that way, we don't have to worry about 6 months down the line because we've managed that feeling. Even like a relationship breakdown or the end of a career. In 6 months' time, it won't be that way. You'll have shifted and changed and moved on, and things will be different. Recognizing whether you overestimate a danger is a powerful indicator of whether you're managing it. So I'll take the example of a job. A catastrophizing cycle will say, I'm losing my job because there's a pandemic on. no one's going to employ me because I've suddenly forgotten all of my skills. I've now not been able to pay my mortgage, even though there's help available. I now ended up on the streets, and now none of my family speak to me. That's a catastrophe cycle. It's what we do. It's ridiculous, but it's what we do. So it's bringing it back down to the, am I overestimating the danger? Yes, you are in that circumstance, because if you lose your job, you might not find the perfect job next, but you'll find a job. You will be able to manage the danger. And the underestimation of your ability to cope is also something that plays into that. Often we think about our fears, which then limit and paralyze our reality. If we take a step back from that and say to ourselves, you know what? I've faced some pretty difficult things in my life and I managed it. It might not have been easy. It might have involved pain. I might have had loss. Most of us have gone through grief. If you start to be able to connect with the fact that you've had some really hard times, but you've manifested and changed through those changes and through those times, and you've ended up with a resilient nature, suddenly you are estimating your coping strategy, not underestimating them. And that's really important. Another behavior that we often do during any kind of anxiety is we mind read. So we constantly think that we understand what people are really thinking and believing about us without asking the questions. It might be that you've got some fears about work, but instead of speaking to your manager about it, you just stay silent and believe that you know what they're secretly thinking about you, which will tend to be something that you then manifest as negative. So it's really important to kind of take a breath and see that you can always find power in just positioning truth. So being willing to have those conversations, being willing to acknowledge that you don't know what other people are thinking, and that's okay. The thing about feeling bad is when we feel bad, we assume that the things that are going on around us really are bad, but it's very rarely the case. And anxiety will whisper in your ear that it is, but it genuinely really, really, really isn't. It's so important to challenge those automatic thoughts. And I guess one of the most important things to recognize that I've talked about, I know I'm coming up to the end of my time, is how can we really manifest the most resilient change where anxiety is concerned? So in the Western world, we do a huge amount of damage by telling people that there are good emotions and that there are bad emotions. When I first started training, and many years ago, it was a very pure kind of therapeutic paradigm I was involved in. And we would very much look at feelings as experiential and passing and transient and manageable with the right kind of help. But I don't think I ever understood the impact of using them as prompts. So a prompt is something that gives you the information required to move through the process. If I feel anxious, if I feel stressed, my emotional prompt is not asking me to remain. And often we do that. We feel the feeling and we think, how can we just in this moment stop the feeling? So it might be we go and have a gin and tonic, glass of wine. If we take recreational drugs, we might have something like that. If we take painkillers, we might have something like that. If we have a partner, we might shout at them. We might feel this feeling and not like the feeling and want to distract ourselves from that feeling. And so we use this whole host of mechanisms that can do that. But in doing that, we deny the power of the feeling. So when you feel stressed and anxious, you're being taught calm, you're being taught soothing. It is the countering of that feeling that gives it its voice. It allows its leverage, and it passes through its process, and it connects us with what we really require. The same as when we feel afraid, when we're feeling scared, the last thing we're being taught is fear. It's always about hear it and then counter it. My fear is to create my courage. So it's about doing something that makes me feel really scared, but doing it anyway. Taking the example before, I'm scared of going out. Then you better start going out, because your answer lies in the prompt. Equally, if you're having a really good time, the prompt is, let's chill out and hang out here. This feels really good. But listening to those prompts is key to managing every experience, and it works on every level, in every way, and it gives you your answers, which is really powerful. As I've said, diaphragmatic breathing is something I think is really powerful. Meditation, I've got loads of free stuff on my Emma Kenny TV channel on YouTube. Please do go over there. It's completely free. And mindful practice is another thing that we'd arguably bring into that. Mindful practice actually is built in emotional prompts. So if you want to learn more about that, obviously half an hour isn't the biggest amount of time for me to explore this in great detail, but certainly go and check that out. And the great thing about mindful practice is you don't really have to formalize it. It is just as powerful going outside and doing some gardening or creating a state of mental flow through baking or colouring or puzzling, although puzzling makes me anxious, but apparently it makes some people feel really zoned and chilled. Just makes me worry about the pieces that I'll have lost. But also just going and spending like an hour. And the reason I say an hour is we do a lot of damage by telling people that 20 minutes of white light on skin is going to be enough to get a good night's sleep. It's not. Melatonin regulation, which is the area of the brain that's required to get a really restful night's sleep, you need to get outside for like an hour. But if you could just go and sit outside, or if you're in a flat, even if you're on some weird tier where they've locked us in our homes, opening a window and just spending an hour listening to outdoors and just attending to the present, it's a really powerful way of managing anxiety. And then finally, before I end, one of the things that I think is really helpful with anxiety work is to make your world small. I can say that with something I have problems with. I feel quite responsible as a human being for other people. I want to protect the way that people feel. And at times that means that I spend a lot of time reaching out online and trying to lobby and trying to change the way things are and feeling angry with the system. But I also know that when I start feeling that that's overwhelming me and I'll get that kind of feeling of anxiety, it's about taking a step back, acknowledging that this time will pass, and recognizing that very often the core of a sensitive human being is that we underestimate our capacity to manage. For most of you listening now, you'll have had moments where you felt overwhelmed in the past. You'll have moments where you felt like you were breaking. You'll have had moments where you broke, but you'll also realize that they're temporary states. And it's holding on to that knowledge and acknowledgement that everything in this world is temporary, even the times of great challenge, even like now. So just take heart and know that these times will pass. It's really important to do that.
Thanks. We've got,
there you go, just 1 minute over.
That's right. There's some questions. One anxiety meds. Someone GP's given it, because that's the thing. I mean, I personally am one of those anti-taking stuff, wanting to do things, and it's sort of, I know in the last 6 months I've gone, do I need to go back to the doctor and get anxiety meds I was on a couple of years ago, and it goes against every grain in my body for taking actual drugs. What else can I do? It's sort of, what's your advice? Because someone said that they're scared to take them due to reading about side effects or just not wanting to take meds.
I think that meds have an absolute place in our society. I think I come from the meditate rather than medicate model, but that's just because it's the way that I've worked over the past. I've certainly seen massive benefits to people who have taken antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds. Obviously, when it comes down to the anti-anxiety like diazepam, Valium and all of those, ideally, they wouldn't be things that I recommended purely because of the more addictive qualities around them. But when you're talking about beta blockers, antidepressants, they're very, very popular. And certainly a lot of people would say that they get them through the most difficult times. The one thing that I would always say before anybody goes on medication is do an analysis of your life and lifestyle. So have you explored your diet? Have you explored your blood work? That's really important as well. If you've got low iron, if you've got low B12, the chances are your anxiety will be through the roof. So definitely explore more of a holistic experience of what's going on within your psyche and what's going on with your physiology. If that's all cool and there isn't a problem there, then maybe explore what you're putting in your body. Are you really taking care of what you're eating? Are you really getting your exercise every day? Are you really doing some meditation? Are you reaching out? Are you journaling and writing about your feelings? Have you bought self-help books to look at other people's stories? And if so, have they related back to you in a way that have made you feel that you can maybe articulate some of that process and journey yourself? I think it's really helpful to explore how much of that self-work you've done. And if you've done it and you're saying, Christ, this is still really dreadful for me, then I think absolutely explore that kind of route, because nobody should suffer and struggle, particularly when it costs you on every level, because feeling mentally unwell costs you on every level. It costs you on the level that people are impatient with you. It's that people don't drop their expectations of you. And on top of that, it's the impatience that you have because you think you should be okay. And so I think that I've watched miracles happen with people that I've worked on a nutrition and exercise level with, and I've worked and seen miracles on people who've gone the medical route. The most important bit for anybody dealing with mental illness of any kind, and we all will, no matter what people think, there will be a mental illness in your life. It will be maybe when there has been grief, or it may be when you have a breakdown over where everyone goes through a period of mental illness. You might not need a classification or a medication intervention, but you will have a period where you feel completely broken. It's normal. So never feel a level of shame for seeking strategic help. That's a level of empowerment. You know, you don't have to feel that you're letting anybody down or failing because you've done exactly as you would do for anything else. You know, if somebody said to me today, Emma, you're going to need heart surgery or you're going to drop dead, I wouldn't sit there going, well, do you know what? I think I'm probably just going to manage this with a bit of meditation, because sometimes you need more, and that's okay. So be aware of that.
Sure. Someone on sleep, because someone has asked, struggling, because that's the thing, the busy mind, because a lot of people, didn't they, I remember reading about it at the start of it all, had full-on manic dreams and real sleep issues going on. So on that, which probably doesn't help, and I know sleep doesn't help. When I don't get sleep, my anxiety goes through the roof.
Of course.
Yeah,
I think that sleep is that bargaining thing, isn't it? It's like, as long as we've got sleep, then we can kind of make it through the most challenging of times. And I think that one of the biggest stresses in the world is insomnia. And certainly with clients in the past, that's been one of the big triggers of anxiety. But it's counterproductive, of course, because you go to bed and think, oh my God, I need to get to sleep. And then you can't get to sleep. And then you feel really anxious because you've not been able to get to sleep. So there's a few things that you can do. And again, this is before you maybe look at going and seeking a treatment off your doctor, because they can give you a short course of sleeping tablets. They can do that, you know, like they do give them out quite often actually, but they're not long term and they're not brilliant for the long term. So you've got to kind of do an audit. Like, so first of all, are you switching off for 2 hours before bed? So do you, and I don't do this, by the way, but I'm sleeping all right at the moment, but certainly if I start struggling with sleep, I always have to do this detox. So you don't want 2 hours before bed to have any screens. And I even mean TV. So if you can avoid any kind of TV screens, any kind of iPhones, any kind of information to be expressed through any technology, get rid of that for 2 hours before bed. Then make sure that you get at least an hour or more white light on your skin. That regulates melatonin, which means that really exhausted, lethargic feeling that we get in the winter months starts to reduce, and we feel a little bit more in control of that. Meditation programs can be really helpful. There's a technique of breathing called 4-7-8, a bit more difficult than the box breath, but 4-7-8 is basically inhale through the nose for 4, hold for 7, breathe through the mouth for 8, hold, and just repeat. So 4-7-8. And that way you kind of get yourself into a zone where your CO2 and O2 helps to really relax you. So I try that as well. And then on top of that, how much each day are you exposing yourself to the things that are triggered fear-wise? You know, is it the news for you? Is it arguments with friends and family over their position versus your position in the current climate? Are you struggling in other areas of your life relationally? You know, are there problems that you can start identifying and exploring? Are you just not saying how you feel? A lot of people do that. We internalize and then we go to bed, and all of those thoughts and feelings, we've not let them out because we feel like by saying it, somehow we're failing. So you have to kind of look at the healthy habits and routines that are around your sleep pattern before you can see whether you need that little bit of extra help. Definitely get outside. I mean, if you can exercise and go for a big long walk for an hour, those kind of things really do make a difference to sleep. And then when you go to bed, if you're having that awful feeling of anxiety coming to you, just get up. I know that's counterproductive to what you probably want. You're thinking, well, I need to get a good night's sleep. But often if we're not feeling tired enough and our brain's just whirring, we'll get into this position where we'll lie in bed feeling really dark and really scared and really afraid. And actually it'd be far better to just get up and read a book. And what happens is you get into a situation where you'll manage your tiredness through that kind of reading behavior. So just look at exploring to do that. And the other thing that I'd say is the first stage for me when I'm working with people around sleep is get some white noise. Something like listening to 10 hours of rain on YouTube. You can get those free streams. That can be really helpful. It gives your brain a little bit of a distraction. It keys you into usually a feeling of comfort because those kind of noises make us feel comfortable and warm inside. And it allows you to get into that nice lulled sleep pattern. So try white noise as well.
I would, you know what, I've got this app, but it's a kid's one, the Moshi. I don't know if any mums out there or dads, but literally every time I put my kids to sleep, to sleep, that sounds so medical. I wish sometimes. I find myself falling asleep, but mainly because it's got, some of the stories have like Dolly Parton narrating it, which is amazing.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Or Goldie Hawn's voice. So yeah, but they're kids ones, but it's the mindfulness, exactly.
Totally.
Someone's asked, and general anxiety. They just, at the moment, little things are really triggering people. Like just doing this, because someone said just doing the school run makes me sweat and then get angry with myself for being stupid, and then makes me feel worthless. And it's thoughts, but they break me down. It's that. Tip, do you have a few tips on that? It's so easy to spiral at the moment. We've got nothing.
The main bit is, the main bit to remember is like, you're a normal, healthy human reacting to a totally inhumane and abnormal situation. I'm so angry. No, I'm very open about my anger with the media and with the government. How dare they have done this to you? I mean, I think that part of what you could do is to try to step aside from the what is you and what is forced on you. How dare they have pumped fear into your lives and your children's lives? How dare they have told you who you can see and who you can't see? How dare they have stripped you from your human relationships? How dare they have stolen facial expression so that you can interact with other humans on a succinct and human level? This is about something that's been forced upon you. You shouldn't be dealing with all of this. This isn't just you feeling overwhelmed and triggered. This is you physically experiencing a world that is triggering. And the reason I say that is when we start using the things that have no control over against ourselves, we aren't just then dealing with the collateral damage of being forced into this position of submission. We're also engaging with that position of submission and using it against ourselves by believing that we should know how to cope in something that goes completely against everything that research has ever told us before. As human beings, it is our duty to be around people that we love and to spend time socializing with people that we engage with and to feel part of a belongingness and connectedness to a wider network, usually at work and within our social groups. If you take that away, you take away what is human. We are 98.8% related to our primate cousins, the chimpanzee, and all they do all day is have fun, play, have sex, enjoy each other, be very social, and essentially connect with each other. We are not a good example of evolutionary process right now. They're still getting on with all the things that makes them healthy and chimp-like. We have failed to do that recently. So I think just stand away from this being about you and say, okay, my reaction to seeing this weird world is because I'm a successful, healthy, emotionally well-balanced human. And it's not okay that this stuff is going on. And I know that I didn't feel this before, so therefore I can assume I won't feel this again. But what I need to do now is acknowledge that it's okay to say to people, I'm really struggling. I really don't like the way the world is. I really don't like the way I'm made to feel that I have to be anxious about my fellow human. And I feel like I need to express that, because then by expressing it, I just turn down that volume and amplification on the anxiety level that I'm trying to pretend is everything's okay. And that's the big problem we've got. And women do it more than anybody. It's like, let's paint the smile on. Yes, we're fine. Let's have some chit chat, but actually I'm dying inside. Be a lot more real and authentic about those feelings, because it will give people around you permission to do the same. But more than anything, it will alter the amplification and noise on those particular beliefs that you have at the moment.
Well, and do you know, I don't really watch the news much the last 3-4 weeks, and I'm just thinking about it now. It's made a real difference in that.
Of course.
I don't think I've watched it. I kind of have seen glimpses or heard glimpses, but I'm like, no, I'm just watching.
Well, no, I mean, what's the point of watching something that's a fake narrative anyway? I mean, I would say to anybody, don't watch it, because you're not being told the truth anyway. So it's really important, if you're going to ever be engaged with anything, that you have a rounded perspective. So if you see something here, you must look at the other way as well. It's as simple as that.
And that leads on actually the another question that's come in about social media. It's been one of my only connections to the outside world, and so much has been positive, but had a fair few negative, not very nice messages sent to me. But I don't want to come off it, otherwise I'll be completely cut off. I do block these people, but I then cannot do anything to get it out of my head. Then it stays with me for a long time. This then increases my anxiety, and it's a vicious circle. How do you deal with these types of people, and what's your advice? Because yeah, social media has kicked off.
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, the best sentence that I have ever learned and that I've said to you guys is, other people's opinions are not facts. And the problem is, we often see somebody's opinion and it makes us feel that we have to question our own, but it's just not true. your opinion, your beliefs, they're unique to you. You don't have to make excuses for them. And also, one of the things about trolls, so particular people that we see go out of their way to be negative and antagonistic to other human beings, there's a very big difference between having a discussion or a belief that you can counter somebody else's opinion and do that in a grown way. I mean, that's completely acceptable, and we should always invite that. People do that to me all the time because I have a particular belief system. They come on and have a discussion with me, and I welcome that. But I draw the line when somebody is abusive or hostile or aggressive or threatening. And the reason for that is we tend to see that those people have what's called the dark triad of personality traits. That's Machiavellian traits, narcissistic traits, and psychopathic traits. So first off, there are a whole heap of people you don't want to be engaged in. So instead of going, well, I'm going to swallow their perspectives, it'd be like, this person probably needs to be treated somewhere, and be willing to just have that point of view. It helps. It disassociates yourself from the pain that they're trying to cause you. And it means that you can block that particular narrative or mute it if you're on Twitter or whatever you need to do. Always report somebody who's being really negative. They're actually really key on reducing that kind of behavior. So know that you've got power. But most importantly, recognize that just because somebody has a different point of view from you doesn't mean that you're wrong. And actually, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily wrong. It just means that you're humans with different forms of expression. You said one thing that was really powerful, which is that you've been isolated and it's made you feel more connected. And there's lots of research out, particularly in the people who are over 35 years of age, that by reaching out online and saying, I'm struggling, or this is how I feel, we actually get loads of validation, a sense of self, and a sense that we belong. And at the moment, that's really powerful. So you have to say to yourself, okay, on a cost benefits analysis, do I get more positives from this than the negatives? It sounds like you do. Unashamedly, unapologetically be yourself. I always say when people try to close me down, I just shout louder. And in the end, they get used to the fact that they'll never, ever be able to do that. So they may as well scamper away and acknowledge that that's good for your confidence, that you can kind of work through that process, feel the pain, feel the anxiety, create a blocking strategy, recognize that the worth is still available to you and you get more from the experience, and move through that, knowing that you're getting the good stuff as well. That's what life's about. It's not always good, but if we get more good than bad, we're in the right place.
Does anyone want to throw any other questions out there? Or the other Emma? So many Emmas on this chat.
Emma only works with people called Emma. That's it. She's got this whole thing. Emma prejudice.
I've been writing notes, Emma. I've got so many notes written down. So thank you for all of those.
Not at all. It's a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Do you got any questions? Because I know you've got you have anxiety all over the shop.
I did today because the tech wasn't working. But yeah, is there, you know, when you're doing breathing and things like that, is there a way that you can snap out of anxiety, or is it something that is just an ongoing thing of like learning and changing your habits? But can you just confront it and go, no, I'm not doing this?
Yeah. So I think you can do thought stopping processes. So when you feel anxious, you could use something like distraction or disputation. Distraction would be something as simple as breaking a cognition, which means you pick up the thing nearest to you, you think about 20 things that you could do with it. Now, on one level, you might think, well, how does that work? But on the other level, it's about neural pathways in the brain. So you're clinically changing the way your neural pathways work. If I can distract myself constantly through conscious competence of doing that, essentially my brain will in the end automatically, when it feels an anxiety response, do something to distract itself in that respect. Or as I said, you can listen to it and work through it by answering and countering it with something like relaxation and just taking some space. Disputation is helpful. It's when you argue with yourself. Helpful catastrophizing. So, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job and I'll never work again. The thought stopping process would be, well, that makes no sense at all. You've always had a job. So why on earth would you not be able to have a job next week? It might not be your job that you ideally want, but it'll be enough to pay your mortgage. That thought stopping process can be really, really helpful as well. Also, I would always say that as a human being, I was so nervous when I was a kid. Like I have physical tics. I still have tics now when I get anxious. So I have like a really extreme anxiety reaction. And over the years, I realized that I could make her my friend. She's really motivating for me. She doesn't get out of control anymore. She's completely aware of where she needs to stay. But she helps me to understand that when I feel a certain anxiety, that I might need to work harder, that I can push myself more. And she reminds me of my motivation and success. And she tells me when I'm afraid of things, it's probably the best place to be, because if I'm afraid, it's probably because I'm doing something well or doing something that I should be doing, even though other people don't think I should be. So I can use her in that way. So I think walking with our temperaments is a helpful way of getting through the more challenging times, instead of doing what I think we're taught in the Western world, which is kind of like deny it, avoid it, work through it, just kind of cut it off. Like, why should I cut off part of my temperament? Like, she's part of who I am, and I kind of now hold my hand and hold her hand, and we kind of figure it together. So I think I make her an ally, not an enemy. So I don't think you ever have to think of your temperament bases and your experiences emotionally as being these things to hurt you. They're not. They're here to inform you, educate you, and help you get to where you need to be.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, isn't it? It's that always that awareness and living as if they're. I call it differently. I have different people in my head, and they're there, and one just picks up the other one.
Totally. All talking to each other. Just to say, that's a really strange thing, though, because I want to just be acknowledging that some of the people listening, you might be thinking, what on earth is Emma going on about? Because obviously around 20 to 25% of the population don't have any voices in their head, don't have any personalities in their head. It's not the same kind of brain process. So if you're wondering what we're talking about, it's that for a large percentage of people, we have different personalities, people chatting, we can do accents, whatever it is, but there are a population of people who just won't get that at all. So
I can lend them some, literally.
Yeah, I can.
Some can move out of my head into these people's heads.
I'm totally with you. Mine talk to each other and have accents, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. And one big thing that someone said is that one of the big anxiety things, right, is there's no endpoint. As you said right at the beginning, it's 3-week lockdown, and then that got extended, and it's just constant, and there's no. So what's your to end it on your advice for like living in the now, given that we don't know what's happening, and
so first of all, be aware that people like me are screaming from the rooftops, and we are going to get an endpoint because we still live in a democracy. And as long as that is the case, there will be people who are truth tellers and truth seekers who refuse to follow a narrative. So just be aware that there's a lot of people who are kind of fighting that narrative and will continue to do so. I think that's important, because I think sometimes we feel like a level of helplessness, but this is a democracy. We vote them in, we vote them out. Simple as that. Secondly, don't try to control what you can't control. And I am guilty of that at times. Try to make your world small. Like, what are the small pleasures? What have you got in your world right now that makes you feel deeply grateful? Not the bigger picture. I mean, the tiny things. So it might be the hug off your child. It might be the sandwich that you have for dinner. Those tiny, small pleasures that in the UK are taken for granted, but if you were living somewhere in poverty, it would just seem like the biggest luxury. Sometimes when we kind of bring it back to those basics, we remind ourselves that even if, let's just say, worst case scenario, which it's not going to be, but even if this was the worst case scenario, most of us will still be able to say we've got a food in our belly, we've got a roof over our head, we've got love in our life, we've got connections that count. It's not the worst case scenario when you look at the worst case scenario. And it's powerful to do that, because we often don't allow ourselves to go to that point, but we would find a way through any system. There are always alternatives, and there are always ways where human beings who are resilient find new paths that work for them, even in chaos. So just kind of connect with that. It will be okay.
Well, that's a good endpoint. It will be okay.
Everything will be all right in the end. And if it isn't all right, it isn't the end.
Cool. But do you know what? Thank you so much for coming and doing that.
Always a pleasure, Em.
Yeah, short and sweet. And if anyone's got any questions, then just email them over to us, because I know where she lives. I can ask her. And we'll see you soon. So thank you.
Take care, guys.
And thanks everyone.
Bye.